We begin in The Hague, where the International Criminal Court has handed down its sentence in the case of the former Congolese warlord Bosco Ntaganda. The man, known as the Terminator, has been given a 30-year sentence following a conviction in July of 13 counts of war crimes and crimes against humanity. His offences include rape, sexual slavery, and ordering massacres of civilians in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. It was the biggest and most complex case in the court's history, with evidence gathered from more than 2,000 victims. Judge Robert Freemer handed down the sentence, and this is part of what he had to say.
For ordering the displacement of the civilian population as a war crime, 8 years. For forcible transfer of the civilian population as a crime against humanity, 10 years. For intentional directing attacks against protected objects as a war crime, 10 years. For pillage as a war crime, 12 years. For sexual slavery of civilians as a crime against humanity and as a war crime, 12 years. For sexual slavery of children under the age of 15, incorporated into the UPC FPLC, 14 years. For intentionally directing attacks against civilians as a war crime, 14 years. For destroying the adversary's property as a war crime, 15 years. For rape of children under the age of 15, incorporated into the UPC FPLC as a war crime, 17 years. For conscripting and enlisting children under the age of 15 years into an armed group and using them to participate actively in hostilities as a war crime, 18 years. For rape of civilians as a crime against humanity and as a war crime, 28 years. For murder and attempted murder as a crime against humanity and as a war crime, 30 years. For persecution as a crime against humanity, 30 years of imprisonment. Mr. Ntaganda, you may sit down for now.
And that's the sentence being read out there earlier in the day at the International Criminal Court in The Hague. Well, let's go straight away to our London studios and speak to the African Affairs analyst and publisher of Africa Briefing, John Ofei-Ansah. John, good to see you there, and thank you for coming in. Just remind us who Bosco Ntaganda is, bearing in mind that some of his crimes are just so hideous that they can't be repeated. They're, pretty horrific, but nevertheless a roll call of crimes for the man nicknamed the Terminator.
Yes, he was. He's a Rwandan born, and a member who led one of the rebel groups. That's the rebel Tutsi groups that launched rebel activities in northeastern DRC soon after the 1994 Rwandan massacre. And after the end of those rebel activities, the war, he was incorporated into the regular Congolese army and became a general, for about 7 years until 2012, when he again left and joined the rebel M23 group. And later on, he ran away and sought, and lived in Kigali, the Rwandan capital. But a feud erupted amongst that M23 rebel group. So he voluntarily surrendered to the U.S. Embassy in Kigali, asking to be brought before the ICC, the International Criminal Court. But that surrender was an act of self-preservation because of the feud that had erupted within that group, for fear of his life. So that's why he surrendered. But Ntaganda is one of the most notorious, most, as the name implied, the Terminator, the most brutal of most of the Congolese rebel leaders. I mean, he directed, operations of that rebel group, FPLC, as to, all the atrocities that took place, were done, under his watch. And the most hideous happened in a town called Kobo in northeastern DRC, where 49 people were killed, including children and babies, some of whom were disemboweled and had their heads smashed in. So that tells you the extent of the brutality that he meted out to civilians in that part of the country. And again, as the court said, he was complicit in enslaving young girls, I mean sexual slavery and rapes, and again recruiting boys under the age of 15 as child soldiers. So that, in a nutshell, is the man, Ntaganda, who has been handed the 30-year sentence by the International Criminal Court this morning.
And John, although the ICC could argue that it stays away from politics, I suppose it's worth bearing in mind that the court has suffered a string of setbacks in recent years. I mean, some high-profile suspects walking free, including Laurent Gbagbo, the former Ivorian leader, earlier this year. So this sentence, so much more than just a sentence, more a sort of message from the court.
Yes, it is a message, but it is a message tinged with some cynicism from some observers, political observers, or legal observers and analysts. Okay, because in the 17 years of its existence, the ICC has indicted 44 or 45 people, and the majority, if I can remember correctly, the majority of them are Africans. So it begs the question that are Africans the only, or is Africa the only place where war crimes and crimes against humanity are committed? Okay, so much so that even the AU is even trying to set up its own criminal court, and some African leaders have even questioned, why they belong, why they signed the Rome Statute that established the court, because it appears the court is biased against Africans. Look, the court cannot touch any, say, American who is suspected of war crimes in maybe Iraq or Afghanistan. I'll give an example. When about 10 years or so ago, the former U.S. Secretary of State, Donald Rumsfeld, had a suit filed against him by some international human rights groups in France, for, war crimes and human rights violation, crimes against humanity. But the French court ruled that he was immune because or he fell under the immunity that protected heads of government and ministers. So, these are some of the things. Even UK, and also has this, what do you call it, this special mission status granted to those suspected of war crimes and crimes against humanity who visit the UK. For example, one Israeli guy called Lisby, was accorded such status that prevented him from being arrested. Okay. Now, I remember again a few years ago when the then president Omar Bashir was invited to attend by the AU to attend the AU summit in South Africa. The ICC requested the South African government, then under Jacob Zuma, to arrest him. The South African government resisted, gave him safe passage, gave him the immunity required, right? And the same too again with Omar Bashir when he visited Jordan. Again, the Jordanian government was requested, to arrest him and send him to the ICC in The Hague. And the Jordanian government refused. The ICC actually sat to censure Jordan for not doing its bidding. So it appears, the courts, the ICC, yes, in principle, is supposed to do a good job. Look, the US has even signed bilateral treaties with certain countries, right, preventing them from handing over any US suspected of human crimes against humanity or war crimes in their countries, from handing them over to the ICC. But even these treaties, bilateral treaties, are not reciprocal. Okay, and even then again, if a country like the US or Germany or Britain, is supposed to hand over somebody by the US Security Council, their allies who wield the veto powers will come to their aid. So that makes the ICC, people question why the ICC is skewed against Africa.
Right. Well, that's an interesting analysis, and I think you put it very well there. But if I could ask you to keep your answers a bit shorter, because we're almost out of time, and I want to get to at least a couple more questions, because, of course, this case is also very significant, isn't it? Because Bosco Ntaganda is the first suspect to be found guilty by the ICC of sexual slavery. And of course now a precedent has been set, and rape as a weapon of war is recognized by international justice. So in that sense, mission accomplished by the ICC.
Yes, it is a good precedent set. I mean, like you mentioned, rape being used as a weapon of war and all that. So it will send a signal, not only to Africa, but to other African countries, maybe developed countries, that using rape, sexual slavery, as a weapon of war now, falls is indictable under international law.
And talking about firsts, John, I mean, you mentioned there Bosco Ntaganda was the first suspect ever to surrender voluntarily to the ICC, even though prosecutors saw it as an act of self-preservation, as you mentioned, because he feared that if he stayed out there on the battlefield, his goose was essentially cooked, his life was in danger, and he was actually better off in The Hague. And we've got about 15 seconds.
Yes, I mean, it was a smart move because for all we know, if he hadn't surrendered, to the ICC, well, he might have been 6 feet under, as we say in London, by now.
Well, John, thank you very much indeed. As always, John Ofe-Ansah, the African Affairs analyst and publisher of Africa Briefing, talking to me there from our studios in London. You're watching The Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead.